Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to analyze one of the poems from Robert Frost, Mending Wall. Robert Frost is considered as one of the greatest American poets of all time. As a poet of 20th century, he has created an identity for himself by blending the cultural ethos of America with the spirit of the world and particularly the spirit of nature. His poetry reads like a metaphor, and most of his poems are often quoted by people to refer to different situations, to different conditions of life in different contexts. Frost writes in very simple diction because he represents in his poetry particularly the rural life or the life in nature of the vast American continent. Most of his poems, they bring with them the geographical setting of New England in America. The present poem, Mending Wall, also belongs to such a group of poetry where the spirit of New England is very much visible. This poem, Mending Wall, it was published in 1914 in North of Boston anthology, and it became very popular because the poem itself reads like a metaphor and it suggests so many things that was not only there in the contemporary world but also in different space and time. And Mending Wall also suggests the myth of Sisyphus, and the myth of the human labor, the continuous human labor in the face of the force of nature or the force of fate. Here in this poem, we find a very animated presentation of the thought of a farmer, a New England farmer, and his neighbor. Though the poem is not in interior monologue or in dramatic version, but the poem is dramatized enough by the fleeting thoughts of the poet as the narrator, who brings in different ideas, philosophies, experiences of humanity to examine a very simple agrarian ritual of New England province. And the poem begins very simply. It is written in iambic meter, and the first lines are of iambic pentameter, and it begins like the statement, a universal statement. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it. So, from the very beginning of the poem, the poet is giving an aphoristic statement that something there is that doesn't love a wall. That means in nature, something is resisting the existence of a wall. The wall is a man made object, it is the creation of the man to define himself, to define his existence separately from others. But nature doesn't allow this separate existence, because nature is having that universal spirit where each and every object, each and every creature, small or big, they exist simultaneously, interacting with each other. And this poem also refers to the contemporary socio-political condition of the world, where in 19th century, by the end of 19th century, the militant nationalism came and dominated the Western world, and which resulted in the two world wars in the 20th century. So, First World War began in 1914, and this poem is written in the same year. So, the tension, the anxiety that the European countries were going through by these narrow-minded nationalism is also having a reference in the poem. The wall is a symbol. The wall is symbolizing that particular aspect of human nature in the tradition of nationalism. So he is telling something there is that doesn't love a wall. So the nature is not in favor of a wall. It doesn't like. The spirit of the nature is resisting the concept of division that sends the frozen groundswell under it. And as a result, the natural forces, they work against the wall. They send the frozen groundswell under it. The ground swells. And this swelling can be attributed to various works of nature. It may be the works of the snowfall, the rain, the heat, which swell the ground and make the ground unstable for the existence of a wall. Or the swelling can be due to the roots of the bigger plants that were on either side of the wall. In spite of the wall, they are spreading their roots to the other side, thus eroding, thus undermining the very concept of separating or dividing this land, and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. So the works of the nature on the wall, which is made up of the boulders, it spills the upper boulders in the sun. The sunshine, along with the wind and rain and snowfall, it destabilizes the upper boulders on the wall, and the boulder slips out. and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. And sometimes it makes gaps within the wall where two people can pass simultaneously. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone. And not only nature, but also the hunters, the human hunters, who are hunting the animals or birds. For them also, these walls pose a restraint, an obstacle, which they also break down in search of their prey. They move from one place to another and they also destabilize, break these walls for their convenience. And the poet, who is presenting himself as a New England farmer, is telling, after the hunters come and break the walls, I come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone. And how the hunters are breaking the wall? They are not breaking like the nature. Nature is spilling the stones from the upper part of the wall. But the hunters are breaking the stone from anywhere because they have to pass through it. So they are not keeping a stone on a stone. They completely demolish some portions of the wall, which the farmer comes and mends from time to time. But they would have that rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. And why the hunters do that? Because they have to make their own hunting dogs who are barking, who are searching for the animals of prey happy. The dogs can smell out the hiding rabbits on the other side of the wall, and that gives the message to the hunter, and he breaks the wall and hunts the rabbit to make the dog happy. The gaps I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. And the farmer is telling, no one has seen who breaks the wall or when it is broken, when nature breaks it, when the hunter breaks it. But the springtime, which is the ritualistic time on the part of the New England farmers to mend their well, and when they come, they find the walls are badly in need of mending. So every spring, the farmers, they visit their field, their walls to mend them. That is the ritualistic part of their existence. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line. So, according to this ritual, he gives the information to his neighbor, another farmer who lives beyond the hill at a distance, that on particular day we will meet and will repair the wall. And accordingly, he comes. And on the day we meet to walk the line. And how we mend the line, mend the wall? We begin from some point and move on both sides of the wall. Both the neighbors, they move and they find out the holes or the broken parts and they mend together from both the sides and set the wall between us once again. And once again, we build up the wall. Once again, we become invisible to each other through the holes. The holes are mended. The broken parts are mended. We keep the wall between us as we go. So as we move on, we rebuild the wall between us. So here the wall is a symbol between two individuals, two neighbors. In spite of being neighbors, we are building a wall between us. We are isolating ourselves from each other. We are bringing up something which makes us invisible to each other. So, this is a reference to the modern existence, the modern man who lives in his privacy, and his privacy is meant for his own self, where the other cannot share. To ease the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are lobes and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. And when they move on both sides of the wall and they go on repairing or mending the wall from both the sides, by picking up the boulders falling onto their own sides and putting it into the vacated space, some of the stones or boulders are like lobes, like braids, rectangular, and some are so nearly balls, they're so round. These stones, they are of different shapes, but they are put into a structure. In spite of their incompatibility, they make a wall. But man is creating the wall in between him and his neighbor, in spite of the similarity. Both are farmers, both are human beings, but still they make a wall to be separated from each other. We have to use a spell to make them balance. And he's telling sometimes we have to use a spell because it is not easy. He's using the word spell, means it is not easy, it is very difficult to reinstate the boulder in its old place because of its size, because of its falling apart from the constructed wall. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. So this line is in quotation, as if this is the spell, as if these farmers, they request the stone, the boulder, that you stay in your place at least when we turn our back, when we will go, because we know again you will fall back with the help of the nature or by the activities of the hunter. But at least till we go home satisfied that you exist unbroken, you please stay. So that is probably the spell, that is probably the charm we work on the stone. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. And it is not an easy task. Picking up those boulders, putting in their places, trying hard to fix it. We wear our fingers. The fingers are bruised. The skins come out. But still we work. Why? Because we consider it just like another outdoor game. Reconstructing of the wall, repairing the wall, mending the wall is just another outdoor game for the farmers of the New England. They are so devoted to this tradition, to their own belief that there should be a wall between the neighbors and it should be mended every year in the spring, that in spite of the bruises on their hand, they enjoy it. It is just like another game where we want to compete with each other. We want to prove that we are better than others, at least in constructing this wall, in putting this stone. I put the stone better than my neighbor. One on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. But then the poet is telling, actually we do not need a wall between us because we are not having the same type of orchard or same type of field, so that our plants or our crops will not be identified. I am having all pine tree on my side. Sorry, my neighbor is having all pine tree on his side, and I am having the apple orchard. So how can they mix and mingle? They are very different from each other. So actually there is no need of a wall to identify that which crop belongs to whom, which part of the land belongs to whom. It is demarcated by the plantation. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. I tell him, he only says. And my apple trees, they won't enter into his field to eat the cones under his pine. Here, the word eat is used intentionally to suggest the violation of someone else's property. It suggests the animal like the cow who doesn't discriminate in grazing over to any place, whether it belongs to its owner or not. So he is telling my apples are not cows, they won't enter into his fields to eat on the cones of the pine. Therefore I tell him, why should we have a wall? But he only says, good fences make good neighbors. This is the maxim of New England farmers, which they had in their legacy from their forefathers who came from England and settled there. That good fences make good neighbors. If there is a fence, if there is a boundary, then we are good people. We are good because we are bound by the boundaries. It may be the physical boundary wall, it may be the legal, it may be ethical, whatever it is. Man is a creature who is good as long as there is a sense of boundary imposed upon him. That is the belief. That is the belief. And that belief is there very much strong in the neighbor of the poet. The poet is having a liberal attitude. The poet is having an open attitude that why should we need a boundary? Why should we need a wall when we are having different identities? But the neighbor is sticking to his principle, his legacy, which his father had handed over. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. But the poet is telling, spring is a mischief in my mind, in me. Spring brings the mischief. What is the mischief? The mischief of the spring is the exhibition of exuberance, exhibition of spirit, of universal brotherhood, of universal spirit. When spring comes to each and every part of this nature. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't spare whether there is a small plant or a big plant. Everyone is charmed by the spring. So he is telling, it brings that mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head, if I could change his mindset from having that legacy of the New England farmers that we need a proper boundary, a boundary wall. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. So he is going to ask that why do they make good neighbors? How people make good neighbors? Or why we should talk about good neighbors? We are neighbors. Isn't it where there are cows? Where there are cows, there is a necessity of the word good coming before neighbors. Good neighbors means when your cows are kept within your boundaries, within your walls, who are not transgressing into the crops of your neighbor, creating loss and disadvantage. But here there is no cows. No cows are there either in my orchard nor in yours. So why the question of good neighbor is coming here? None of us are going to trespass into each other's place. Before I built a wall, I would ask to know what I was walling in or walling out. And he's asking a question to the mankind, question to the humanity. When I build a wall, I should ask the question to myself, what I am walling out, what I am walling in, what I am keeping to myself, and what I am keeping out. Man is a creature of both inner and outer nature, inner and outer expressions, inner and outer thoughts. Man cannot live within himself. Man is not an island. Man is not a confined creature. So when we are having the concept of wall, immediately the question comes, what should we keep outside the wall and what should we keep inside the wall? A sense of discrimination within the self. And to whom I was like to give offense? And when I will build the wall, who will be offended? Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say else to him, but the poet is repeating the first line. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. Nature doesn't discriminate. Nature never divides. Nature is continuous, single entity. Nature is unified. Human nature is also like that. But by building the wall, we are dividing it, creating the space of private and public, creating the space of me and other, which is the problem of man and which is becoming acute in modern times. The concept of more and more privacy, the concept of discrimination between inner and outer is creating the problem, and the boundaries of the nationalities are dividing humanity, and there is bitterness, there is jealousy, there is hatred, there is violence, which is making humanity lose its prime qualities, prime characteristics. But it is not else exactly, and I would rather he said it for himself. So, who is breaking down this wall? He is telling, I can say it is elves, the supernatural creatures, but it is not elves exactly. It is not the supernatural creature, it is the nature. And I would rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top. But my neighbor is unmoved. My neighbor is not affected by my thoughts, by my debate within myself that should we go for a wall or not. He is very much convinced with his legacy of thought, with his idea that good fences make good neighbors. So, he is bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. In both the hands, he is holding two stones from the top and bringing it to put there in the holes, in the gaps. And that moment I look at him, I find him as if he has been transformed into a man of stone age, for whom stone was everything. Stone was the utensil, stone was the weapon, stone was tool, stone was the source of life, the identity of life. So this stone wall between me and my neighbor is probably is a residue, a legacy of that ancient stone age. We were somewhere having the stone within us. We are not creating the wall on the field, we are creating the wall within our mind, within our heart, dividing, discriminating between private and public. He moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying. And by looking at him, not only I think that he belongs to this age of Stone Age, but also I think as if he moves in the darkness. But it is not the darkness of the shade of the trees or the woods, the forest. It is the darkness of the mind. It is the dark age, thought of the dark age, when man believed that walls can protect us against not only encroachment, but also will give us an identity of our own. My land, my farm, my home, everywhere I need a wall, my identity. Every part of the nature will be identified in the name of man. Man will transform the free nature into his own private property. So, he moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees, but that darkness is not the darkness of the woods or the trees, shades of trees, but of the mind, of the thought. He will not go behind his father's saying. Never in his life. Whatever you may try to tell him, however you may try to convince him, he won't go away from his father's advice, father's saying. And he likes having thought of it so well. And as if he has thought thoroughly about that, and he has been convinced that this is the best way of living peacefully in this world. Peace and happiness comes with the walling of the self. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. So the poem ends with the repetition of that New England maxim. Good fences make good neighbors. The humanity is now being divided and subdivided into smaller and smaller and smaller and till smaller individualities. We are not going to subscribe to the spirit of humanity. We are individual, tiny individuals, powerless, tiny bodies, identities. So the modern man is a tiny individual confined within a very small, tiny place on the earth, but boasts that I have my identity, I have my legacy, I have this. But according to the poet, it is nothing. So, this poem is trying to bring the binary ideas that swarmed, that came strongly in the first part of 20th century. One, that was the concept of the global village. The world was shrinking by the discovery of the waterways, discovery of transport, modern transport. The world was shrinking. People started conceiving the idea of global village. But at the same time, this is the time when strong militant nationalism started dividing and further dividing humanity into small nations, small identities. So the poem is trying to bring out this conflicting spirit of early 20th century through this poem in a very subtle manner, through a very insignificant symbol of a wall, mending of the wall, a ritual. He brings out a very pertinent question of early 20th century. And the poet is not taking any side of the argument, any side of the debate. He leaves the poem ambiguous. It is for the reader to decide whether we need the wall or not. This poem, like any other poem of Frost, is in blank verse. There are enjambments, there are mid caesura, there is assonance from the beginning, but still the poem is in the mode of a discourse, a dialogue, like the classical philosophers or the poets. And through the symbols of cow, the wall, the stone, etc., he brings out the thought of modern man and analyzes it, scrutinizes it very minutely by simultaneously presenting both sides of the argument in the most impartial manner. Therefore, this is one of the most talked about poem of Robert Frost. We will discuss about its questions. Questions can be asked about the use of symbols or the concept of modern individuals, about which Eliot has written that how modern man is isolating himself gradually from others and he is happy within his confinement. This poem, through this impartial presentation of both the arguments, is giving a scope to the readers to think about it. Thank you.